Hello and welcome to English 4 Unit 1 Module 1. We will begin by considering the earliest stages of British literature. The essential questions and big ideas for this and all following units will help you focus on what you should take away from the readings and assignments. In fact, you may begin answering the essential questions during this introduction. Essential Question 1. In what ways do early British writings reflect the cultural and social values of the time periods? What roles does character development serve in Beowulf and other early texts? Big Idea 1. Beowulf's story represents the Anglo-Saxon oral tradition, warrior culture, pagan theology, belief in fate, and the relationship of loyal dependency. Contemporary Western audiences, that's us, recognize the later inclusion of Christian ideology within the epic and parallel this with real and fictional modern heroes. Essential Question 2. What traits are characteristics of a hero? What motivates a hero to act? Are certain characteristics universal? Big Idea 2. While there are heroic archetypes, the social and cultural influences of a particular group determine the characteristics of its leaders and heroes, as in Beowulf. At the end of this introductory screencast, you will take a quiz that tests your understanding of this new information. You may replay any part of this as often as needed to support your learning. This introduction will help you understand the background of Beowulf, an Old English epic poem that may be the oldest surviving long poem in Old English and is commonly cited as one of the most important works of Old English literature. You'll recognize many things about the story. For instance, Beowulf is an epic hero, similar to those you might see in many modern movies. The epic hero often has traits or attributes that make him or her larger than life. An epic hero must face challenges and opponents that the ordinary person couldn't handle. However, there's often a character flaw or other weakness that brings problems to the epic hero. For Luke Skywalker, the character flaw might have been insecurity caused by not knowing anything about his parents. Katniss Everdeen's flaw might have been either fear for her family or an inability to trust in anyone else. Thor's flaw is a little harder to find, but after all, he's a comic book character. Other characters in the story are known as foils. Those people contrast with the hero or central character to highlight his or her important characteristics. In epics, many foils die to prove that the hero is larger than life. The term foil comes from days when people who sold jewels put pieces of metal behind them to make them shinier, kind of like rings from gumball machines. You will also recognize from modern movies and many TV shows the presence of a villain. The villain, too, can be larger than life, either because of a physical difference, often created with costuming or camera angles in movies, or because of a blatant character flaw such as greed, ambition, or prejudice. In the end, the villain will fail, because the hero's good will inevitably overcome the villain's evil. You'll be able to come back to this graphic representation of the villains in Beowulf while you are reading the story. Like most well-told stories, Beowulf has more than one theme or central idea. The themes in the story will be equally familiar to you: good versus evil, the importance of identity, heroism and heroic deeds, strength and skill, and loyalty and allegiance. Even recognizing character types and themes, the story would be hard for you to understand if you didn't know anything about the times in which Beowulf was written. Beowulf is the oldest surviving English poem. Although it was likely recited by campfires by traveling storytellers for decades, if not centuries, before it was written down, The poem was recorded in Old English, which is the basis for the language we speak today, but which sounds nothing like it. You should take a moment later and use the hyperlink to listen to what Old English sounded like. Some of the characters in the story actually existed, but other than that, we don't know how much was based on historic truth. If you ever played gossip when you were little, you know how much a story can change as it's passed from person to person. We don't know then how much the story of Beowulf changed between the time of the events that prompted its telling, between about 680 and 835, and the time that it was written down around the year 1000. If all of that sounds like a really long time ago, take a look at this timeline. What things on this line do sound familiar? We know that, although the story was set during pagan times, it is likely that a monk wrote it down, because he added a lot of Christian references throughout the poem. Eventually, the manuscript ended up in the hands of Robert Cotton, a member of Parliament who founded an early library. When that library burned in 1731, the manuscript was partially damaged. Today it is well cared for in the British Library. So where did the story take place? It wasn't in England. The action happens in what is now Sweden, where a tribe called the Geats lived. The poem itself has some interesting characteristics too. Watch for alliterative verse, which is a verse form that uses alliteration, a pattern of repeated consonant sounds, as a way to help indicate the underlying structure. Note the pattern of repeated consonants in the Old English lines from the poem. Also watch out for litotes, which is an understatement or negative expression. You might say to a friend whose performance you really liked, "Well, I guess it was all right," when what you really mean is, "That was awesome." And watch out for kennings, which are ways of describing something or someone in 2 or 3 words that you use over and over. For instance, they called the body Bonhus, or Bonehouse, while the sea was Ronade, which literally means whale road. There are some unfamiliar words you will want to know as you read. A scop is a bard or storyteller, like the ones that probably told the story of Beowulf as they traveled from place to place. Comitatus was an escort or comrade, explaining how warriors and lords pledged their loyalty to each other. Thane was another word for warrior. That term was still used in the time of Shakespeare. Mead Hall was a large building where the lord and his warriors slept, ate, and held ceremonies. Think of it as a cross between a dormitory and a cafeteria. Weird was another word for fate. Epic is a story or long poem like Beowulf that tells the story of deeds and adventures of a hero or the history of a nation. An elegy is a sad or mournful poem that tells about or reflects upon death. And a homily is a written sermon, or section of a poem, that gives direct advice to the reader or listener. Now that you know all about where Beowulf came from, let your reading adventure begin.